Good morning. My name is Jennifer Harmoning, President of the Burnsville Chamber of Commerce. We're here for our November HR Roundtable. A special thank you to our sponsor, King & Companies, and our host and moderator this morning. I will turn it over to Sandra Schlafer from King & Companies. Thanks, Sandra.
Hi, thanks, Jennifer. Yes, I'm Sandra Schlafer with King & Companies, an employee benefit firm here in Burnsville. And I'm really excited today to have Annette, Margaret, and Arthur Walden from the attorneys with Doherty, Molina, Southwest Hills, and Bauer. And what we're going to do with all this COVID going on, there's been lots and lots of questions on how does PTO or sick leave or FMLA or even your disability insurance work with all these COVID laws. So I'm really excited for them to be our businesses here in the Burnsville and beyond area. So with that, why don't we hear from, I believe Arthur is going to be speaking first.
Good morning. My name is Arthur Walden. I'm one of the litigation associates here at Doherty, Molina, Solfest, Hills, and Bauer. And with the help of the very talented and informative Annette Marguerite, Annette has done a fantastic job putting together today's presentation. So I'm going to, I guess we'll just jump right in, and I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint, and Annette and I will help walk through.
Okay. Thank you, Arthur. This is Annette Marguerite here. I have been with the firm off and on since actually 1989. I did have the opportunity to be the HR manager for City of Apple Valley for about 5 years in the late 1990s, which was a great experience for me to try to sit in the seat a little bit of where you folks are and to deal face to face with employees. I do want to commend one of our staff here at the firm, Elizabeth Nelson, who really put all of the wonderful pictures and animation here in this presentation, because I, of course, am not very good at such a thing. So we really appreciate her help. And a quick shout out to Mary Middlestad from Country Cabinets. Mary and I have been on the golf course a couple times together, at least their company on the course, and I'm one of the duffers coming through that have had the opportunity to talk to her. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into this tapestry of work, people's lives and leaves that you will deal with so valiantly with your companies. So a significant question here, and actually this top part with the green portion, how much paid leave can employees take, that comes from a COVID informational poster that is right on the Federal Department of Labor website. So we've divided this into a couple different slides, but I do want to point out that there are some rules about the size of employers to whom these COVID leave laws apply. If you have over 500 employees, it doesn't apply to you. And interestingly, it does. That's what impacts so many of your major healthcare systems. Any of you who have a friend that's working, for Alina or Health Partners, these major systems, they have well more than 500 employees. So those employees, the very frontline employees we talk about, do not get these particular kinds of leaves. Also, if you have fewer than 50 employees, and we'll discuss this as we go through the presentation, but you do have some opportunity to opt out of providing some of these types of leaves based upon some environment or some economic questions that the department has you answer. So this particular slide, again, this is the second part of the poster that is on the federal DOL website. We wanted to include this just because it just kind of in a nutshell describes the two kinds of paid leave that are in existence now through December 31st. If you have employees who have some concerns with COVID, the top one deals solely with with the employee, him or herself. If your employee is following some type of ordered quarantine, or a healthcare provider has told that person to stay at home, or if your employee has COVID symptoms and are seeking a diagnosis, that employee is entitled to up to 2 weeks or 80 hours of paid sick leave at their regular rate. The next line is also part of the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. The first two lines, which are up to the 80 hours, those are part of the what we will refer to later as the EPSLA. The second line here, if your employee needs to care for someone who is subject to a quarantine, or the healthcare provider has asked them to stay at home, or if the child, your employee's child, needs care, their care provider or their school is closed, which is something I'm sure all of you are dealing with right now. Again, the employee gets up to 80 hours of paid sick leave, but at a 2/3 rate of their regular pay. Finally, and then this is the second paid leave law. This is the expanded Family Medical Leave Act. If your child needs care because, again, school is closed, and if the person has been employed at least 30 calendar days, that employee gets up to 10 additional weeks off. Again, it is a 2/3 rate. So again, just kind of in a nutshell, there are the two paid leave laws solely for COVID. Also, for you employers, you might want to start talking to your accountants soon if you have used any of those leave laws, because you get to receive a credit taxes here for 2020 taxes if you have paid any money out under the emergency paid sick leave or the expanded family medical leave. This next slide is something I know all you HR folks know, but again, kind of just sort of a reminder here. The regulations and the statute just uses the word leave, but you folks all know that means different things. If I have a non-exempt manual worker, and we have one of those in a series of examples we have coming up. Yeah, this could be, anyone that this could be a mechanic who's laid off. This could be people that were doing yard work. Certainly would be any of the hospitality types of industries. That leave is different than, again, it could be a non-exempt person, but where that person can do the work at home or can be a teleworker. This might be your, APAR type of accountant person. This could be where they could just click away at the keys, get the work done. They don't have to be on the job. So they're still getting work done. They just start doing it from home, so they don't need the paid leave. Finally, you have leave for an exempt teleworker who, like in our example here, might be the CPA, gets to stay at home, can do all the work at home, but may need to shift the hours just because then they take care of the child for a while. So granting this paid leave isn't always necessary, and the regulations acknowledge that based upon a worker's ability to work off-site. Okay. All right, now Arthur will take us through some description of the family that we will be dealing with.
Okay, we've got a couple of vignettes prepared to hopefully provide some potentially real world examples. Maybe some of you have already experienced some or all of the situations that we'll be going through here. But our couple is Pat and Terry. Pat and Terry are married. Pat works at Acme Manufacturing, which is a Minnesota corporation, regularly employing at least 100 employees. Pat has specialized tasks, keeping the line in good condition. Prior to COVID, Pat's position worked 40 hours per week and is still considered non-exempt. Pat recently had knee replacement surgery in January of 2020, was out on FMLA for 2 weeks, and then back to work 4 hours per day for 3 weeks, thus using 3.5 weeks of regular FMLA. In March, the entire plant closed down for 2 weeks, then was deemed essential as it transitioned to producing personal protective equipment. Pat survived furlough, but work hours have been reduced. He's now working 35 hours per week.
Okay, then we have Terry, Pat's wife. Terry is a CPA in a small accounting firm, which employs approximately 30 people. She's been working from home since early April. She's considered an exempt employee as a professional. A quick reminder, we use the phrase throughout this presentation, exempt, non-exempt. That means exempt from Fair Labor Standards Act requirements, paying overtime and minimum wage. That's one of the things that we like to, as attorneys, we like to remind people. A lot of people we know use the phrase hourly or salary. We remind folks that hourly or salary isn't the only test, that there have to be actual tasks which permit someone, for instance, to be exempt like Terry as a professional. So we'll use those phrases throughout. If you have questions about that at all, please shoot them over to the chat, and then we can address those or further explain those. Pat and Terry have 2 kids. One is 12, one is 7. Beginning this school year, the 7-year-old is in 2nd grade, back to school full time. Fortunately, Pat's parents are able to pick the child up from school, and Pat or Terry drop the child off. One of the things, again, that you folks have perhaps discovered is that busing for school has been pretty tough. So you may have had a number of employees who have said, "Yeah, I have to drop my kid off at school first because they can't get the bus due to social distancing on the bus." So you may have had to do some schedule changes already just to accommodate parents getting their kids back and forth to school. Then we have the 12-year-olds in middle school and is doing a hybrid situation. 12-year-old fortunately is in a learning pod, and then either Terry or Pat alternate helping supervise the pod on Wednesday, but they've been able to make that work with no impact on their work schedule. Okay, now life hits.
On September 15th, Terry goes to HR complaining of shortness of breath, feeling feverish and nauseated. Terry intends to get tested for COVID. Terry has 50 hours of PTO sitting in her bank. Does Terry have to use her PTO? Terry does not. She does not have to use her PTO because under the EPSLA, she receives up to 80 hours of paid time at her regular rate to obtain a diagnosis because she is showing symptoms.
Okay, Terry, being a good employee, calls in on September 18th and lets her firm know that she has a positive COVID test result. Her symptoms are worse, but doesn't require hospitalization. And fortunately, the kids have been able to get over to Pat's parents for a few days, hoping to avoid getting sick. Is there any opportunity for leave, paid or unpaid, for Terry? Okay, Terry has 56 hours of paid sick leave remaining available to her under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. She used the 24 hours, namely 3 days waiting for test results. So she technically has 56 hours under EPSLA that she can use for sick leave at full rate for herself.
For Pat, on September 18th, Pat tells Acme that his spouse Terry has tested positive for COVID and Pat wants to get tested. At this point, Pat has no symptoms of COVID, nor does he have any healthcare provider that he's consulted who has encouraged Pat to self-quarantine. So with Pat showing no symptoms himself and without a healthcare provider encouraging Pat to self-quarantine, is Pat eligible for any paid or unpaid leave while he waits at home for his test results? If Pat has banked any paid leave through his employer, he can use that. However, because Pat has exhibited no symptoms and because a healthcare provider has not consulted with Pat and encouraged him to quarantine, he is not entitled to any paid leave under EPSLA.
And just kind of a reminder for you folks is that, excuse me, Congress did try to make some balance between the employee, employer, where, gee, what if I have an employee who is just really nervous, really afraid of everything, and they want to get tested, and of course want to stay home until they get tested? At least Congress in the statute said, well, no, the employee doesn't get to make that decision by him or herself. If a healthcare provider says to quarantine, that's fine. Or if they are exhibiting symptoms. Yep, we want people who exhibit symptoms to go get tested. And the point of the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act literally is to pay people to stay home, to stay out of work, to stop the spread, flatten the curve, all those sorts of things. But it isn't, getting that extra leave isn't something that an employee entirely controls or can just on a whim decide that, gee, I think I'll go get tested today. It's kind of a nice sunny day. I can go golfing. I think I'll go get tested. No, that is not how it works. Okay, on September 21st, Pat is informed the test is negative and Pat returns to work the next day. Question for the employer: should Acme or can Acme require that Pat provide a copy of the negative test result before Pat returns to work? Technically, yes. The ADA permits requiring the note. But what you as employers would want to look at, do you typically require a return to work medical information? Would you do it after just, a day or two? Is it after 3 days out? Generally just providing, go ahead and ask at this time if that would be typical protocol for you to do. If it isn't typical, feel free to just make a note in Pat's file. We put a line here just to note for you the documentation required by the federal regs to receive the COVID paid sick leave is very minimal. It just kind of name, rank, serial number. Again, showing Congress's intent. We want to make this easy. We want people to go get tested. We want them to stay out of work. So we're not going to put them through a lot of hoops. And then I asked the question there, well, if ACME requires the written test result and he refuses, what are you going to do? Are you actually going to push that issue? You don't want to make him sit out from work anymore. So as much as possible, we want these COVID things to fit into your typical practices already. And Congress has, did recognize some of that.
Things are looking better for Terry.
Yeah.
After 8 calendar days of symptoms, she feels good enough to at least return working at home. She starts back full-time on September 24th. Does the firm need to count her COVID experience on its OSHA 300? If Terry had used up her Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act 80 hours and was still sick with COVID, are there any additional leave options? The firm has found no evidence that Terry contracted COVID at the firm, and so it does not need to include her case of COVID in its report to OSHA. Terry could use any additional paid sick leave or vacation time that she had banked under the firm's policies. If she remains sick, the firm may have to explore other options and potentially put her on unpaid medical leave if the firm policies permit such leave.
And this is just as a quick jump in here. I think kind of interesting is that if you have an employee who is sick with COVID, they get the 80 paid hours, and anything else thereafter, then they have to rely on whatever you as the employer provide them. Those extra 10 weeks of expanded family medical leave, those are solely to care for someone else. An employee cannot use those to take care of him or herself, which again, I believe it was Congress trying to be somewhat equitable between the employee-employer, so that an employee doesn't get this huge gift of totally extra leave, and at the same time keep their bank, which of course could collectively be kind of expensive for you, the employer. Okay, on September 25th, Pat's mother, Pixie, calls Pat, says they cannot come pick the kids up from school because Pixie is feeling feverish, has chills and a bad headache. Pixie and Pat's father, Philip, both go to be tested. Just as an aside, Pat is Pixie and Philip's only child residing in Minnesota. I'm sure a number of you employers have been through that situation where your employee is that sandwich generation and has parents to care for plus kids. That's Pat. On September 28th, Philip calls, says Pixie's test was positive, but his own was negative, which hopefully relieves a little bit of pressure on Pat because his father can at least take care of his mother, as far as we know. Pat hears Pixie coughing loudly in the background. Panicky Pat requests his supervisor at ACME to be able to take an additional 45 minutes over lunch during the rest of the week to go check on Pixie and bring food for his parents. Must ACME grant the additional time off? No, it doesn't. Pat has presented no evidence he's required to care for his parents. And in fact, as the information says, his dad is available as a caregiver. Secondly, Pat is already working shortened hours, 35 hours per week. So ACME can argue it could be an undue burden because of Pat's tasks, especially he's maintaining and fixing the line. So presumably Pat needs to work while the line is moving. So they could argue that it's an undue burden to provide additional time off, but they may just be able to deal with it as some kind of shift change to enable Pat to stop in and see his folks, or work 10 hours one day, 7 hours another day, something like that.
Okay. Unfortunately for Pixie, on September 29th, she's admitted to the hospital by her physician and is receiving oxygen. She's eventually released on October 3rd and is able to return home. On September 30th, Pat and Terry are informed that their second grader has been exposed at school to a classmate who tested positive, and the second grader's classroom is shut down for 10 school days. Terry intends to handle the distance learning for 5 days, and Pat's going to assist and handle the distance learning for the other 5 days. Do either of them receive any unpaid leave? Pat has all 80 hours available under the EPSLA. And those are going to be paid at 2/3 regular pay. Terry had already used her 3 days, 24 hours previously, and she also used 56 hours for the other 7 days. She has exhausted her EPSLA. She can use the extended Family Medical Leave Act for the additional days of the school week where Terry's going to be off of work. She'll only receive 2/3 pay for that time. First 2 weeks are unpaid, but Terry and the firm have documentation that Terry's 80 hours of EPSLA and the first 80 hours of EFMLEA have run concurrently. Terry's employer may object to Terry taking any paid leave due to the school closing because the firm employs fewer than 50 employees. Remember, they only employ typically around 30. This exemption only applies to the school closing, but it does not apply to Terry's own illness. Additionally, an officer of the firm must make certain determinations provided by federal regulations as to why granting the school leave is truly going to be an economic hardship for the firm. The firm can require Terry to use her PTO that she's banked at the same time as she is using the EFMLEA paid leave.
I'm going to jump in and expand just a little bit on this exemption. If you have 50 or fewer employees, like in this case with Terry, if you as the employer realize that, look at Terry, we can't give you all this paid leave, for the school closing. Can somebody else help your kids out here? Because we as an employer are need to make, in the as the slide says, we need to make is an economic hardship for the firm. And those particular determinations are listed in the regulations, but even the Federal Department of Labor, just one quick war story. I had received a phone call several weeks ago from a woman actually who was terminated, a very small firm. She was the office manager, and the folks at unemployment told her that what her employer did was illegal. Her kids went into hybrid school. She wanted to work from home 3 days, come into the work 2 days, and the employer said, no, you're an office manager, we need to have you all 5 days a week. So they terminated her. I suggested that she call the Department of Labor because I said this obviously is a very small employer. They may not, Department of Labor may not enforce this. And in fact, the Department of Labor told her no, the firm was so small, they needed her there, that her termination was okay. So for those of you that are smaller, do really make the business decision of whether you can afford to have this person out or whether you really need to insist that they try to make some different arrangements. Okay. Then we have a question. Terry has, and I'm sure all you HR folks have received this. It's just kind of your employee is fishing for information here. Terry on October 1st calls HR on behalf of her 68-year-old father who lives in Bemidji. Thomas was furloughed from his custodian job at Bemidji State. The custodian team has gradually been brought back during the fall for classes, except Thomas has not been. The HR person has told Thomas, you're over 65, it's risky to bring you back during COVID. Thomas thinks it's age discrimination because, of course, his manager just doesn't like me. In September, also, Thomas went to be tested for COVID to prove that he can work, and the test was negative. Terry asks you the popular question, can BSU do that? And what we want to remind everybody is while you have COVID as an overlay, nonetheless, the EEOC has jumped into the fray, and they've provided enforcement guidance that discrimination laws should not interfere with an employer following public health guidelines. I am really not certain what that means, but the EEOC does say, however, that their equal opportunity laws still apply. So in this particular fact situation, BSU should return Thomas' position and not just, gee, you're over 65. There might be an issue here. And in fact, if Thomas has some kind of specific disability like diabetes, that might make him more susceptible with COVID. Again, BSU then should try to see, is there any kind of accommodation that they should make for the diabetes?
All right, on October 15th, Philip trips over the hose for his oxygen while putting it away. Philip trips over the hose at his house while putting it away for the winter. Breaks both forearm bones in his right arm. Unfortunately for Philip, he needs surgery. He's going to be kept overnight at the hospital. Pat will assist bringing Philip to Pat and Terry's house to care for Philip for a few days after surgery. Does Pat receive any leave during the workday to care for Philip? Pat can use regular FMLA to care for a parent if Pat's help is needed. Intermittent use of FMLA is more likely required to be granted versus under the extended FMLA.
Again, the intermittent use, for those of you that are governed by FMLA, I'm sure the intermittent use is kind of painful to execute just because, of course, it requires extra bookkeeping. In this situation, however, Pat may want to, he may have to help or bring his father to doctor's appointments, to therapy. So he may need an extra hour here, hour there. Under the FMLA, I believe there's a higher legal obligation to assist with that, with the, and keep track of the intermittent use. Under the extended FMLA, keep in mind the only reason you get that is, you know, to care for kids. It doesn't have to do with one's own situation. So you as an employer can work a little bit harder about, yeah, you can take intermittent leave, but I want you to take it, you know, in 2 or 3 hour blocks, so that you're not just coming and going during the day, you know, just because, or when your dad needs that sort of help. But that intermittent use still is something that you as an employer are going to have to consider. Okay. On October 25th, Acme learns that a worker on the assembly line is tested positive, and this is the 4th positive test in 7 days for the assembly line workers. Acme decides to close the line for 5 work days for a deep clean. But since the employees are gone, Acme wants Pat to stay on duty and to perform maintenance so that when the employees come back and they start the line again, everything is ready to go. Pat feels a little vulnerable based on having been exposed to COVID by his wife, and then also from his mother visiting. Pat has asked not to have to come in until the deep clean is finished. Can Acme require Pat to come in anyway? Come on. Yes, Acme can require him to come in. The exposures that he had to both Terry and Pixie are now more than 2 weeks old, and under the at least general CDC guideline of 14 days, he should be out. And then secondly, Acme, of course, does need to provide appropriate PPE for Pat while doing the maintenance, but it certainly is an understandable business decision, and to try to keep the business up and to keep the line moving, that they would want maintenance while the line is down. So I think Acme certainly is within its discretion as an employer to do what it can to protect Pat, but to require the maintenance while the line is down.
And Pat eventually agrees to work on site during the deep clean. He ends up working 60 hours during the deep clean work week. In response to the enhanced risk of exposure to COVID germs on surfaces, Pat requests if he can quarantine for 2, or if he should quarantine for 2 weeks. If Pat eventually quarantines, would he be eligible for any paid or unpaid leave? It might be prudent for Pat to quarantine based upon his concerns, but again, he hasn't done so at the encouragement or urging of a healthcare provider, and so unfortunately for Pat, there is no paid leave available under the EPSLA. Regular FMLA is not available at Pat's request, doesn't trigger the FMLA, and there's no ADA issue warranting a leave here either. Acme could provide additional paid leave into Pat's leave bank. That's an employer decision, but that leave would not be eligible for reimbursement as a tax credit. And so again, this, is a decision on the employer's part whether they want to, incur that cost for the benefit of its employees. But unfortunately for Pat, there is no real paid leave available to him.
Okay, and then for the last of our scenarios, on October 30th, Terry tells HR at her firm that her pre-existing rheumatoid arthritis has been greatly aggravated by coronavirus. which is making her work at home at the computer very painful. Terry asked to be allowed to work 3 days per week for the next 3 weeks to provide respite for her RA. Terry has provided the medical information from her treating physician, which makes that same recommendation. What should the firm do? And in this situation, the firm is too small and is not governed by FMLA. So Terry can use whatever other leave she may have available. The firm likely needs to treat the rheumatoid arthritis, however, as a disability, which is covered by the ADA. The firm is large enough to be covered by the ADA, and then also, of course, the Minnesota Human Rights Act, which protects disabilities. So the firm should enter into the interactive process regarding Terry's requested accommodation, requesting, updated medical information so that they know maybe Terry won't need the full two weeks off. Is there anything else that the firm can do? For instance, just an example that I provide here is, for instance, is their voice activated software that they could put on Terry's home computer, excuse me, that could help alleviate RA. One last note that, and we don't have necessarily a slide for it, but I was just reading some materials and something for you folks as HR, I'm sure you're doing, you're receiving a number of requests, I would guess, for folks who want some holiday time off, or they have some vacation or PTO sick leave on the books that they might lose. Do consider the tax implications. If it is a COVID related item, do you want to go ahead and use these COVID related paid time off, or do you want to have employees, if possible, they might prefer to use some of their own time. Number one, if they use their own time, of course, then they get paid the entire rate. They can use some of their own time, which you as an employer provide, coupled with those paid COVID leaves for which they only receive 2/3. But some of them, if it's a use it or lose it situation, some of your employees might want to use your time that you provide them and roll some COVID over into the next year, thinking that Congress might extend use of the COVID pay at least a little bit into 2021. So that is just a quick, do be sure and see if there's any tax benefits for you to really look at the COVID, or is it better, might your employees prefer to not use the COVID pay, but use their own banks? And the employees certainly can choose to use their own banks instead of the COVID related pay. So that is the end of our prepared presentation. So do we, Sandra, do we have some questions that Arthur and I can handle at this point? If you're watching later, you see we've got Arthur's contact information there, his email. So if you have questions later, we want you to feel free to email those to Arthur, and then we can get you an answer back. Or if we have questions right now.
Sure. So Jennifer, do you want me just to ask the questions, or do you want that on the non-recorded section?
You can go ahead and ask the questions now.
All right, so a couple of things. I have two questions. One is, what if you were exposed to COVID at work?
Mm-hmm.
The employee came to work and not knowing that what does the, what should the employer do? So say that that employee came to work, they determined that they had it, say exposed other employees, and what's the next step for the employer?
I think the next step for the employer, of course, is to presumably the first employee was presumably tested and tested positive. If and this is what's funny about COVID. The first employee comes in and says, I had an exposure, or hopefully phones in and says, I think I was exposed, I'm going to go get tested. Hopefully that's the first thing that happened. And if that happens, then that's the point of the emergency paid sick leave. So let's say that employee comes in or calls Monday, I think I was exposed, I'm going to go get tested. But if I was exposed, it was last Wednesday. So so in theory, I've already been contagious. I've already perhaps passed it along to my workmates. But anyway, let's find out if the first person actually was positive. So Joe calls you Monday. I think I was exposed last Wednesday. I'm going to get tested today. Calls you back in 2 days. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm positive. So the 2 or 3 days I was at work, I was probably contagious. So you've dealt with Joe. He's been tested. He's on emergency paid sick leave now. Question, what do I do with everybody else who may have had an exposure? Number one, Joe, as an employer, can you foresee who may have been exposed by Joe? You're caught in that a bit of a tough place. You can't tell your world, oh, by the way, Joe has COVID, because you need to keep his medical information private. But if Joe works in a particular division, if you are somehow aware that Joe, may have had lunch with folks, you want to put out and depending on the size of your staff, you might want to say if Joe works in, a particular division or even physically a particular part of the office, to inform those folks, hey, you may have been exposed to somebody here at work. Please feel free to go get tested. We'll give you paid time off to go get tested. Everybody else who may just, and you want to be broader than necessary perhaps, but please encourage those folks, go get tested. You have, let's enable you, can you work from this division? Can folks work from home? Even if you can't work from home, no, we're going to give you these next 2 or 3 days off because we're concerned about you. We don't want this to spread. Please go get tested. Meanwhile, stay at home. And that really is the point of that emergency paid sick leave. It doesn't make any employer happy because this might be 15 people that now we're going to be out. But again, it's one of those where can we nip it in the bud today? We'll have 2 or 3 days out of an entire division, perhaps, but let's get them tested, find out if anybody else is actually sick, because you just don't know how long it might go on for an individual. But those are the 2 things, and I know it's vague. People are going to start looking around. They're going to figure out who isn't there. They're all going to figure out it was Joe because Joe is not at work. But that becomes what's important, and that becomes under OSHA, the employer's obligation to provide a safe workplace. As soon as we knew we had a positive, we got everyone in that division out. We got them tested. You're right, everybody went home and kind of twiddled their thumbs or did some cleaning and closet cleaning like we all did. But you do have that overriding OSHA obligation provide a safety, a safe place. So I think the only option is to really get people tested, get them out of the workplace.
Good. So I have two more questions. Jennifer, I still have time?
I'll talk
Yeah.
fast.
Mhm.
Yes, okay. So how does short-term, like group short-term disability and long-term disability insurance plans work with these COVID laws? So I would imagine you can't double dip. So do you see that, do you see any interaction with the COVID laws, or the COVID laws are pretty much taking care of the situation and there are no claims under STD or LTD?
I think there can be claims under STD if we get someone like Pixie who got admitted to a hospital. And are there resulting impacts, for instance, to her lungs, where it's we're not going to pay you because you had COVID, but we may have to pay you because COVID so damaged your lungs, or someone like Terry with rheumatoid arthritis. Where she ends up perhaps in such pain, she may end up out on short-term disability, but the actual claim won't be COVID, but the claim will be her rheumatoid arthritis. So I can see those kinds of issues where, especially that short-term, could get impacted.
Great, thank you. And then looks like the last question I have, or we have, is somebody said we have an employee and we only have 2 employees. Employee A has mentioned that she might need to take time off to take care of her child because her partner is currently unemployed, though he's looking for a job. Does this small employer have to grant the time off?
I don't.
Her job is something she cannot do from home.
I don't believe that the small employer has to grant that time off, and it's unfortunate for the employee, and we all appreciate that schools are very much in flux, but in the fact that you can't do the work from home, I need you here because we have to have someone doing this work, otherwise the firm may have to shut down. And it's that economic reality that the employee experiences, because the employer doesn't need to grant any paid time off if the employer is closed. And the regulations are very clear about that. If for instance, if this were an employer right now in the hospitality that has to shut down, no employee is getting paid leave. Why? Because the employer is shut down. And so in this fact situation, which is similar to that woman who called me, and Department of Labor flat out told her, look, your place is too small. No, your employer does not need to give you paid time off, because if you aren't there, the employer closes, nobody gets any paid time off.
Got it.
Under the regulations. So no, it is, and it's not, the most desirable thing, of course, but each of us, employers, employees, nobody is where they want to be.
Right. So is there a form a small employer would be completing stating that, or how is that?
In that situation, no, you're going to have to glue together.
I'm sorry, Annette?
No, I think the employee is just going to have to glue together some other help.
Got it.
To help take care of the child.
Great. Okay, and one thing, I want to thank you both for doing this wonderful presentation. There's so many questions surrounding COVID leave laws. And I do want to apologize, Annette, your last name is Marguerite, not Margaret, I think I said.
No worries. I love the name Margaret. I've responded to that for my entire life. I have no problem with that.
All right, great. So let's see here. I think, Jennifer, we do have another session. We're going to start in January. And that is going to be on sexual violence in the workplace. And we have a speaker coming from 360 communities. So So we, of course, it is not a good topic at all. I mean, it's great to be, it's just a sad topic, but that is the reality, is sometimes domestic violence does overflow with circumstances in the employee in the workplace. So we will be having that on January 26th. And as we get our meetings for 2021 listed, then they'll be starting to be posted on the chamber website. So that is all I have. Jennifer, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you for this whole year. Sandra has been coordinated all of our speakers, been our moderator, been our sponsor for this program. So I can't thank you enough for putting it all together. Looking forward to a whole nother series kicking off right away in January of 2021. So we are putting that together right now, and we'll have registration ready in early December for that series and for the individual programs. People can always sign up for individual topics, or they can sign up for the entire series and have access to the library of recordings that goes with it. So with that, on behalf of King & Companies and the Burnsville Chamber of Commerce and our great speakers from Dougherty, Melinda, Solfest, Hills, and Bauer, Arthur and Annette, thank you so much. We will conclude our recording for today.
Thank you very much for